Well, I'm going to welcome everybody to, now 2 quotes here. I'm welcoming you to a place of intersection between church, mission and academy, deriving from the legacy of Henry Martyn. And to a house of Christian converse and counsel. And if you want to know where those quotes are from, buy the book. Yes. And so we're here to celebrate the legacy of Henry Martyn in Cambridge, in India and in the world. 25 years of the centre's activity on this Westminster campus, to celebrate the book, to celebrate the vibrancy and variety of world Christianity, and to celebrate what God has done among us. So, welcome to an Anselmian afternoon of faith seeking understanding and understanding undergirding faith. And it's an afternoon to make and trace connections. So as Rachel said, I've been involved with the centre for many years, and it all goes back to a morning in autumn 1993, when Graham Kings burst into my office in the University Library. I had just arrived, along with the Royal Commonwealth Society collection, and Graham said, I hear you've got lots of books on mission. When can I see them? At that stage, they were still in cardboard boxes. Well, the rest is history. And so it's very good to see so many of you in person and on Zoom. And I'm going to embarrass a few people, but a special welcome to John Cooper, who you can read about in the book, which you must buy, the first overseas mission advisor for the Henry Martyn Trust. I was hoping there would be some past directors on Zoom, but Emma told me she had a much less interesting meeting that she had to go to. But a special welcome to past members of staff, past and present trustees. It's good to welcome Roger Bowen, who had a key part as a chair of the trustees. But what you really want me to do is to get on with introducing the speakers. So, Graham, you have 5 minutes on Henry Martyn, starting now.
Terry, thank you very, very much indeed for your advice and support at the Centre for over 29 years. You didn't say how many years, but it is 20. And there were 350,000 items in the Royal Commonwealth Society collection, which you're in charge of. And I'd like to continue in the mode of thanks. Thanks to Ian, our main editor. Your own chapters 2 to 6 in the book are a beautifully told story based on detailed research in the archives and also on interviews with key people. And to Muthuraj, your chapter 7, the final chapter, is not only visionary, but also heartwarming. And thanks to my colleagues during the years 1992 to 2000. The founding of the Centre in 96 was the fruit of extraordinary teamwork in the library. Rosemary Matthew, Jane Gregory, who's here today, helped by Stephen, who's also here, and Isabel Fox. In the archives, Sue Sutton, who can't be here today, and Carol Pickering. In administration, Debbie Ty, and especially Kirstine Kim, now at Fuller in the States. Overseas advisors, Jill Stediford and Sue Anderson. Chairs of the Trust, Don Humphreys, who was also Vicar of Holy Trinity, and Howard Bigg and Colin Parker. And Regis Professor and ex officio trustee at the time, David Ford. He'd come from Birmingham just before we arrived and had been influenced by Hollenweger and Newbigin. And Kenneth Cracknell, who was a tutor at Wesley House, David Cornick, who was on the staff here at Westminster, and David Thompson, then in the Divinity Faculty still, and on the board of Westminster. They were all key on the transfer to setting up here. To you all, many grateful thanks. In 1994, on an aeroplane to and from Bangladesh, where I was speaking at a mission conference, I was reading Constance Padwick's biography of Martyn. And as usual, I do an index at the back and my own index. And I was noticing today that it says royalties from the film of Henry Martyn could go to MCCAA. Now, MCCAA was the Martyn Centre for Christianity in Africa and Asia. That was the first idea of the title, now the Cambridge Centre for Christianity Worldwide. Maybe we will have a film eventually, you never know. And thanks for the life of Henry Martyn, 1781 to 1812, scholar, missionary, translator, and inspiring saint. I have here in the archives a miniature portrait of Henry Martyn. I think I can show it on Zoom there. But the really clever thing about it is that behind there is a lock of hair. And we think this is probably Martyn's own hair. So I don't really believe in relics, but if I did, we'd have one here. And when Scott Eiler, who was the latest biography, is writing a biography at the moment of Henry Martyn, came and had lunch with the staff at the centre and friends, we showed him that. I'm going to read out just 3 quotes from my chapter in the book. Firstly, by Henry Martyn, then Kenneth Cragg, and then Constance Padwick. Concerning his relationship to Indians, Martyn noted, "These men are not fools, and all ingenuity and clearness of reasoning are not confined to England and Europe." And then Kenneth Cragg, the great doyen of Christian-Muslim relations, in his book, Troubled by Truth, he talks about Martyn's Bible translations as theology in philology, and describes the self-scrutinizing pages of his journal, quote, "Martyn's introspective honesty, total compassion and genuine anxiety for integrity make of autobiography itself a dialogue concerning truth, truth within and truth beyond. It was precisely the gentle quality of his earnestness which made dialogue the more engrossing, both in spirit and in theme." And then Constance Padwick, she sums up Martyn's life, "That youth in years who yet knew the abasement and the rapture of a saint, and who flung at the feet of Christ a scholar's dreams and a heart of a lover." Now, I mentioned Scott Eiler, his massive book of all the still available letters of Henry Martyn is here, published in 2019, and is well worth reading. It's got an introduction, which is a semi-biography, and he's now writing a major biography on it, and we say thanks to him. And I finish with thanks to God for the gifts of Jesus Christ and his Holy Spirit. And I'm going to read the collect for Henry Martyn's Day in common worship. So let us pray. Almighty God, who by your Holy Spirit gave Henry Martyn a longing to tell the good news of Christ and skill to translate the scriptures, by the same Spirit, give us grace to offer you our gifts, wherever you may lead and whatever the cost, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. Yeah.
Thank you, Graham. I'm now going to invite Ian, historian at the Centre of the Federation, Cambridge 70, and he's going to tell us more about John Barton, who was an obscure name to me until I read Ian's work. But I think, Ian, you discovered more about John Barton in preparing for today. So a big welcome to Ian.
Thank you very much. It's wonderful to be with you and to be with the colleagues and friends who have been involved in this project, which has been a rather amazing for me lockdown project of delving into the archives there when no one else was allowed to be there from the staff, but I was allowed because I was a volunteer, and I was isolating. So I am going to speak about John Barton, and a certain amount of what I say about John Barton is in the book, but at no extra cost, you are going to get some more today about John Barton, which is not in the book and which I hope you will find of interest. So, I'll just make sure I'm working this properly. I'm just trying to forward slides here. Ah, yes, thank you. So this is a tablet which is still in the Holy Trinity Church, and it reads in part like this. This tablet is erected to the memory of the Reverend Henry Martyn, BD, Fellow of St. John's College, and 2 years curate of this parish, that is Holy Trinity. He gained by his talents the highest academical honours, but counting all loss for Christ, he left his native country, and having faithfully done the work of an evangelist in preaching the gospel of a crucified Redeemer, in translating the Holy Scriptures into the Oriental languages, and in defending the Christian faith in discussions with learned Muslims, he died at Tokat in 1812, in the 31st year of his age. And then it ends up, he being dead, yet speaketh. And the reason why this is significant for our story is that it was something that really inspired John Barton to set up the trust and then the Henry Martyn Hall. John Barton was a person of great energy, and I've been really impressed that really without him, we wouldn't be here as the Cambridge Centre for Christianity Worldwide. It was his vision and his drive which accomplished that. And he is a rather forgotten figure. And so I'm very pleased to be able to say something about somebody who was an evangelical pioneer and an entrepreneur. There is a memoir of John Barton written by his son Cecil, and I think Janice can probably wave that. You won't see it on the screen, but I'm not allowed to have this in case I lose it. So it's in the care of Janice over there. But it comes from the CCCW library, where of course there are many books. And if you haven't encountered the library, please do encounter all the significant volumes that are there. But this book, even though it's of interest, doesn't really cover in any detail the work that John Barton did in setting up the Trust and the Henry Martyn Hall. So a little bit about John Barton. His grandfather was involved in the anti-slavery movement and was on a committee with Thomas Clarkson, whose name many of you will know, studied at St. John's College, Cambridge, one of the leading people involved in the anti-slavery movement. Young John Barton began to take an interest in Christian mission overseas when he was young, but this gave way to a greater interest in botany. John's mother died when he was 5, and his younger sisters and he were brought up by an aunt called Josephina. His father died when he was 15, so you can see that he's left really to some extent to his own devices to find his way in life, and that's how he looked on it. In the course of a number of travels that he did, he was collecting wildflowers and rare plants, and he made some good friends. And another aspect of Barton is his gift of friendship. And a number of these were evangelical Christians, and one of them, Frederick Gell, University of Cambridge lecturer in Hebrew and a fellow of Christ's College, and later a bishop in India, encouraged Barton in his faith, in the young Barton's faith, and suggested that he study at Christ's College in Cambridge. And Barton took this guidance seriously, became a student with maths and later natural sciences as his main subject. A decisive event in John Barton's life took place in 1857. And this was David Livingston coming to speak in Cambridge. David Livingston, famous as an explorer, as a missionary, visited Cambridge to see a friend of his who was a curate in Barnwell. And Livingston hadn't intended to speak at any meetings in Cambridge at this time, but it was arranged that he couldn't leave Cambridge without speaking, and so he was booked to speak in the university Senate House. And with this rather august Cambridge audience to address. He spoke about his travels. He spoke about the end of the slave trade, which he was committed to. He referred to the commercial possibilities of Africa, but then he issued a call for service in Africa. In other words, a call for missionaries. And he stated that for him, for Livingston, this could not be called a sacrifice when, he said, we remember the great sacrifice which he made, who left his father's throne on high to give himself for us. And Barton was amongst those who were challenged by Livingston's vision for costly mission. And Livingston ended, I leave it with you, you people here in Cambridge. And he exhorted his hearers to fear God and work hard. And those two ideas remained in John Barton's mind. I must fear God, I must work hard. At that time, about 8,000 former Cambridge University students were Anglican clergy. It's quite a remarkable figure, isn't it? They were serving or retired, but it was reckoned that apart from those serving overseas as chaplains, only 12 of these had gone overseas in world mission. So for Barton, when he discovered this, this was a terrible imbalance. All of these people serving in this country, so few going overseas. And so he became the student leader of the Cambridge University Church Missionary Society, or Union. And his formidable energy was devoted in his last year at Cambridge to changing the existing situation in which he saw international mission being neglected. Those who joined what was called the CMU signified their willingness and intention to go out as a missionary. This was a very common way of speaking at this particular time. It became even more common later. By 1875, this union of those intending to go overseas had grown to 226 members, which was quite remarkable because the university population was 2,000. So over 10% had committed themselves to this overseas endeavor. In May 1859, Barton married Catherine Wigram, whom he had known for some time, and he also graduated with honors in maths, despite, he said, spending too much time on his plant collection. He became a lay worker at a parish in London in preparation for ordination. But then tragedy struck. His wife Catherine's health deteriorated, and in March 1860, less than a year after their marriage, a little daughter was born, but she died within 3 months, and in this period, his wife Catherine also died. So it was a devastating start to what he had anticipated as his ministry, and he spent some time in retreat in the Lake District, recovering from his great loss. But at the end of September of that year, he was ordained by the Archbishop of Canterbury, the evangelical John Sumner. And now we move on a little to India with the Church Missionary Society. So Barton now takes off to India, and his main task during his first 3 years before his home leave was leading the Agra mission, the CMS college there in Agra, which you can see in the photograph. This had been established by the CMS and it became affiliated to the University of Kolkata. This was a really significant move of CMS to affiliate with university education in India. There were 300 students and 15 teachers, half of whom were Christians, half of whom were from other faiths in India. And at Agra, Barton enjoyed the range of subjects he could teach: history, natural science, maths, geography, English grammar, biblical studies. And he was very happy that he was able to feel free to teach the Bible in the CMS college in India. He didn't actually believe that in government colleges, the Bible should be something that was imposed upon people. He didn't want people to be coerced into teaching something that was not their own faith. He was very wary of that. As well as his work in the college, Barton was involved in Anglican life in the region, and he's 24 at this point. So he's the principal of a college, and he's also making some quite outspoken statements at times, such as, it's really disappointing that Daniel Wilson, the Bishop of Calcutta, should have spent £20,000 on the cathedral, which would be about £2.5 million, and think of that in India. And there was so little to see from it. Well, actually, there seems to be on the picture there quite a lot to see from it, but Barton wasn't convinced. And another area of involvement was interdenominational, through contact especially with Alexander Duff of the Free Church of Scotland. And Barton was impressed always by anything ecumenical. If he saw people cooperating, he loved it. And he saw in this United Missionary Conference at Lahore and other associated events, he saw this desire to work together. He also helped significantly with the rebuilding of a large orphanage at Secundra, 5 miles from Agra, which was under the auspices also of the CMS. And he became involved in fundraising. And this is a real story throughout the life of John Barton, the ability to get people to part with money and to do things with it. In 1863, Barton married Emily Elliott, the daughter of a travel writer, quite a well-known travel writer of the time. And in 1864, they spent a year in England with Barton taking up speaking engagements. And in a major speech to the annual meeting of the CMS, the Church Missionary Society, in the Exeter Hall, a great venue of the time in London, he said, "Missionary progress is not to be measured by statistics. What is important is that the seed of God's word is sown in people's hearts." And in this speech, he commended overseas mission, but insisted that a missionary overseas was not engaged in a greater act of self-sacrifice than a Christian at home. The sacrifice that matters, and you can hear some echo of David Livingston here, the sacrifice of one's will on the altar of the love to Christ, of love to Christ. So a year back in England, and now the Bartons with a young son, and the family would grow to 6 sons and 2 daughters, and all of their histories can be traced, these children, but I won't get into that. They're all good stories. Barton had persuaded the CMS that a college connected with the Church of England was needed in Calcutta. And here again, you could see him persuading, envisioning, and getting money. So this started what was called the Cathedral Mission College, affiliated to the Calcutta University, and Barton becomes principal. 135 students, all of them except 3 were Hindus. So you can see that he is very much at home in a situation of dialogue across faiths. And over the years, Barton came to know influential Hindu leaders, notably the reformer Keshub Chunder Sen, who delivered what you possibly know, the famous speech in 1866, where he spoke of Jesus as the greatest and truest benefactor of mankind. For a Hindu, this was widely reported. As well as Barton's main work as principal of the college, he also had charge of St. Thomas's Church in Calcutta, which had been opened by Daniel Corrie, a close Cambridge and India friend of Henry Martyn, who became Bishop of Madras. Barton spent another time back in England, and then from 1871 to 1875, he was secretary of the CMS's Madras mission. You can see the picture there of the Madras mission. And again, he was delighted by the cooperation that he found now in South India. He said Anglicans, Presbyterians, Baptists, Methodists, Congregationalists working together, especially through the Bible Society. And he said he had never before seen such committed cooperation. And perhaps we can see in this the seeds of what became the Church of South India, that there was this vision of people from different denominations. And he was also impressed by the leadership of Mar Athanasius, the Bishop of the Orthodox Church, the Oriental Orthodox Church. So he was traveling considerably, considerable distances in this period, and then in 1876 returned to work in Britain again. And here we take up the story of Holy Trinity Church here in Cambridge, and the involvement of John Barton in the life of Cambridge. This church, of course, was very famous for the previous ministry, not immediately before Barton, but the wholly transformative ministry of Charles Simeon. So Barton took up a new ministry, and he did so in a way that inspired confidence right across many circles of Cambridge. He visited many people around in the congregation and others, and began the restoration of the Holy Trinity building. Despite the enormously influential ministry of Simeon, the church building itself had remained much as it had been 600 years previously, which is quite a staggering thing to think about. And Barton wanted change. So here's the inside of the building. And one of the things he noticed was, and Simeon could have told him a lot about this, that the doors at the end of the pews could be locked by those who rented the pews. And they had been locked in Simeon's time by the pew holders to stop these students coming in and disturbing the life of Holy Trinity Church. So the pew holders locked the pews to keep these people out. But under Barton, these were removed, and a number of other changes took place. And Barton always explained the reasons for his changes. When you read about Barton in Cambridge in this point, you get a feeling of him moving at great speed, visiting somebody, moving to another part of the town, visiting somebody else, attending meetings, and building up a wide circle of friends. And this would be key to setting up the Henry Martyn Trust and to everything that followed, friendship. We read that in his haste, he could be rather forgetful. And when going to London for CMS meetings, was known to arrive at Cambridge Station without any money to pay for the train travel, and probably borrowed from somebody else because he could persuade almost anybody to give him money. And sometimes he left bags on the train, including important papers for the CMS, but everybody forgave him because they loved him so much. He was prone at times to overworking, and sometimes started at 5 o'clock in the morning working and didn't finish till 11 o'clock at night. But the big thing really, and that's the hard work that David Livingston said he had to do, but he always had time for people and always sympathetic and understanding to those he spoke to. Now we come to a very important partnership here, and the partnership is with Hanley Mole, the first principal, founding principal of Ridley Hall. And in 1881, Barton suggested to Hanley Mole that they should work together, and Hanley Mole, taking up the principalship of Ridley Hall at the suggestion of Barton, wanted that to be combined with a lectureship at Holy Trinity Church. So the idea was that this would combine something of the academic with something of the front line of mission in the church. And in that year, this is another interesting connection, Mole married Harriet Elliot, who was the sister of Barton's wife, Emily. So they were united in vision, but also through marriage, they're having married sisters. And this is a really important part of what was to happen later, because both were committed to extending the vision among students of Christian service, both in this country and overseas. Barton and Emily and their family lived in the large Holy Trinity Vicarage in Brookside, Cambridge, and their vicarage was open for hospitality for students. It rather reminds me of Luther and the way in which students were present at almost every meal, because Emily says they were even here at breakfast time when she perhaps wanted a little bit of privacy. But they were in touch with about 200 undergraduates, which in that time was a very significant number within the university. So there's Ridley Hall. Oops, let's go back. Sorry. Jenny's just going to help me here to get back to my real slide.
Oh, sorry. This one? Back?
Yeah, so it's the next one. Good. Thank you, Jenny. So as well as supporting Ridley Hall, Barton made an initial move in 1881, and this story then now comes into what I cover in the book. towards gardening support for the establishment of a venue in Cambridge dedicated to the encouragement of world mission. And he wrote a letter to the Record, it's an Anglican weekly, referring to a recent appeal that the Bishop of Truro had sent round, E.W. Benson, later Archbishop, asking for contributions for a memorial aisle in the new cathedral in Truro to commemorate the 100th anniversary of Henry Martyn's birth in 1781. Martyn's associations in his early life were with Truro, but Barton was convinced that Cambridge was the place above all else where Martyn should be remembered and celebrated. So he was kind of in competition with what was going on in Truro. And as part of a range of appeals, Barton addressed all friends of the Church Missionary Society and outlined his idea for a hall to accommodate 200 to 250 people. He was very specific in what he was wanting, a venue for missionary-orientated meetings and with other smaller ancillary rooms for other groups. It had to be in a central position in relation to the Cambridge colleges. So then he started his attacks to bring in his recruits. And a really important one was B.F. Westcott, the famous B.F. Westcott, Regius Professor of Divinity. And the Regius Professor of Divinity, who is here with us today, has always been, since then, an ex officio member of the Henry Martyn Trust. So Barton lives amongst us today in terms of what he achieved then, that Westcott was the chair of the very first meeting that took place of what became the Trust. Then wider groups were formed, wider committee, with some bishops and some heads of Cambridge colleges and all the university faculty of divinity professors. So this was the Henry Martyn Trust. 100 years after the 1781 date of Martyn's birth, we have the Trust. The initial momentum seemed impressive, but this was not sustained initially to the same degree. Donations did come in from a range of individuals and groups, but initially spasmodically. Now, just to give you an example of how Barton worked and asking for contributions, and all of this, of course, is in the archives. And Philip can help you if you need to be guided around the archives. He wrote to a Mr. G. Fox. I don't know who Mr. G. Fox of Durham was, but he was somebody he knew, and asked him to consider giving £100 to this appeal for a hall. Now, £100 is £10,000. £100 then is £10,000 today. So here he's just asking one individual, can you please give a gift of £10,000? Fox, this individual, in his reply, was not, as far as I can see, greatly in tune with evangelical thinking, but he did donate, and he said to Barton, it's in your favor that Henry Martyn's name has got a reputation which has reached even to those who have no sympathy with his dogmatic theology. So the name of Henry Martyn just produced money, as well as other things, of course. Barton's work on behalf of the hall was interrupted, and I would say in a positive way, by the visit of the American evangelists D.L. Moody and Ira Sankey to Cambridge in 1882. This was a real wave of missionary enthusiasm. The Cambridge Seven comes out of all this, and Barton was very involved in that. But now we come to the Henry Martyn Hall, and you'll see it there. And Edward Pryor. So Edward Pryor is the architect. Edward Pryor was the professor of architecture in the university. And you can see again, you know, Barton isn't prepared to just go with any old architect. It's got to be the professor of architecture in the university who is going to design the hall. Unfortunately, Pryor's original design was just inordinately expensive. So even for Barton, it was a step too far. And so they had to curtail some of that. But they did find a great site. There was a scheme in Market Street, which meant that an old house was going to be pulled down. And we have all the documents about this. And this would make available land on which a new building could be erected. And this was bang next door to the Holy Trinity Church. Now, some people think, oh yeah, the Henry Martyn Hall is there and Holy Trinity Church is there. That was obviously designed, but it wasn't actually designed in that way. It was just a great site. And so that was where the Henry Martyn Hall was built. And trustees were appointed in a more formal way. The Regius Professor Divinity, as I've said, ex officio, and the other ex officio always is the Vicar of Holy Trinity Church. So the foundation stone was laid in 1886. We read on a cold and snowy day. And the order of service spoke about Henry Martyn, to the inspiring memory of Henry Martyn, scholar, evangelist, confessor, and man of God, and a later generation. Declares this home one of Christian converse and counsel, as you already said, Terry. That's what it was. It's a wonderful phrase, I think. Christian converse and counsel. And then the next year, the opening of the hall was celebrated, and the sermon was preached by this rather formidable character that you can see on the screen, Henry Montague Butler, the new master of Trinity College. And he spoke in quite striking terms of how Henry Martyn gazed with rare intensity upon the person of Christ. So it wasn't just a doer, it was someone spiritually impacted. And an example of devotion, said Butler, was given to the Church of England by this holy man. And so, and this is again, is all in the book, the number of groups that used the hall, the significance of the hall, it was immensely significant. We have to think that in those days, many, many local churches didn't have rooms that they could use for meetings. And so many people used the hall. It's a remarkable story. And now I'm coming to the end, because this is something else that Barton had in mind, a library. He had it in mind from the beginning, but it wasn't taken up until the 1890s. And a printed appeal in 1895 expressed deepest thankfulness that the hall was being used, that progress was being made in missionary concern. But they said, the university has students of every subject, but no students of mission. And this was the call to set up a library. And it recounted the people who had been in the history of Cambridge University, and said, the appeal said, in this era of missionary information, let every university but Cambridge above all others have a library of missionary books, well supplied and attractive. And we have that library. It's there. This is what Barton wanted to have, and it has happened. And the appeal also said, a praying church must be a reading church. I think that was a wonderful way of putting it together, the spiritual and the academic. To the end of Barton's ministry, he was offered episcopal positions back in India. He declined these. He did spend a further year in India as a sabbatical away from Holy Trinity Church. And he reported back from India on that year. He said, I have some experience of hard work in my life, but I have never worked, by this time he was 53, at such a high pressure as during these years in Tinnevelly, this 1 year on sabbatical, so-called sabbatical. And he spoke about office work and accounts and traveling. And he said, I strongly deprecate imposing so much office work upon a bishop. I'm sure you were able, Graham, to avoid such traps. But he was always thinking strategically, Barton. And his vision for India was reinforced even in this year, a vision of a self-governing, self-supporting, and self-propagating church in India. And people have said his time inaugurated a new epoch in the area where he was. In 1893, he left Cambridge to take up the post of Secretary of the Church Pastoral Aid Society. And it was a sad leaving of Cambridge for him and the family. There's a stained glass window in Holy Trinity Church, which commemorates Barton. But I must say that until I really delved into Barton's life, I'd been in Holy Trinity Church, but the significance of it had never really struck me, but it's there. And so how do we finish? We finish with this, that I want definitely to commend to you the example of somebody who had such energy, such devotion, such ability as Barton did. In the last years of his life, he was known by many as St. John the Beloved, John Barton, the Beloved. But his legacy continues, the legacy of the Trust, the Hall, the library, the people who are here today who have served in the centre, who have set up the centre and served in the centre. And so, as well as giving you the memory of John Barton, I give you these people today who continue his legacy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ian. And thank you, Lord, for a great ecclesiastical entrepreneur, prayer and fundraiser. Do you think fundraising is a spiritual gift?
Oh, yes.
There'll be a chance shortly for people in the audience here and people on Zoom to ask questions, make any comments to any of our speakers. But last but not least, I'm going to ask Muthuraj, current director, to come and share his vision and experience. Thank you, Muthuraj.
To be honest, I'm going to thank people, but at the end, I'll share very briefly about some of the directions we take the center, which I have put in the last chapter of the book. So first of all, I begin thanking God for Henry Martyn, for the center, for today, and for John Barton and the many missionaries who were involved in establishing the Henry Martyn Trust, and several friends and supporters throughout the years. And thanks to the Wolf Institute for this space today. They've been very kind. And thanks, Terry, for kindly agreeing to share. And my co-authors of the book, Graham, Ian, and also Janice, who has been very supportive in the process. So thank you, Janice, not only with the book, but also while at the center. So thank you very much. And my colleagues at the center, Rachel, Jenny, Philip, and Ruth. And also we are very glad that we are joined by Polly Keane, whom many of you know, who was our administrator for more than 18 years, only recently left us. So we are very thankful for her. And all my trustees, Sarah Snyder, current chair, who is unable to be with us today, and other trustees, but also Roger Bowen, who's a former chair, who is here with us. So thank you, Roger. And my previous directors, so including Graham, who founded the center, and Brian Stanley, and Emma Wildwood, who is actually now joining us on Zoom, as well as two interim directors, Sebastian Kim, as well as Jesse Singh. So thank you for their work. And also I want to acknowledge those staff who worked at the center before I came. Some of you are here. So thank you very much for your work too. And everyone who is here from CTF, different houses, from the local churches and other institutions. So thank you very much. Especially I want to acknowledge two people here. Professor David Ferguson, the current Regius Professor of Divinity, whom, as Ian said, is an ex officio trustee of the center. But I also remember and want to acknowledge there is a personal connection with him for me when it comes to studying world Christianity, because 16 years ago, he was the one who offered me a scholarship to study in the University of Edinburgh when he was the head of the school there. So there's always very interesting connection between Cambridge, Edinburgh, and India. So thank you, Professor David Ferguson. And also Dr. Yo Hostin, the World Christianities lecturer, who is fully supporting the work of the center, and with whom we CCCW organizes the termly seminars on world Christianity. And also, I would like to acknowledge my family, my wife Mahiba and our daughters Mona Mano, for whom obviously the move here has not been that easy, but they've been tremendously supportive and supporting, and thanks to them. Yeah, so once again, thanks everyone. And as I said, just 3 or 4 sentences about what I said here about the vision. World Christianity for centuries has been primarily understood and seen and interpreted as more of Christian expansion, Christianity expanding to the other parts of the world. That has been a mission. So that has drawn millions of people to Christ, taking the gospel to several cultures. But for non-Christians or people from our friends from other religions and non-religion, sometimes it is also a totalizing power, which they react very differently. So that has been a kind of a primary journey. In fact, when the Henry Martyn Trust was founded, the work was done primarily. This was the approach. Last 60-70 years, thanks to Andrew Walls and many others, Lamin Sane and many others. So world Christianity has been given a particular focus of the global South Christianity. Or while studying world Christianity, the focus needs to be on the global South. And now, primarily for that reason, I'm here, because I got an opportunity to study. And now there's a huge amount of literature and voices and people who come from the global South and work on world Christianity. But unfortunately, in some circles, still world Christianity is seen as a non-Western Christianity, which is actually a limitation. Now, the center's vision is going beyond these two approaches, and to see how the word world in world Christianity stands actually for connections. It is neither the expansion of the Western Christianity alone, nor just the focus on the world Christianity, and not just focus on the non-Western Christianity, but it is actually how there can be a dialogue between global and North, Christianity in global and North, how there can be ongoing ecumenical dialogue and connection and relations between different denominations, which was quite powerful and influential in the 20th century, but kind of been declined, how world Christianity can offer a space to renew this dialogue. But not only that, world Christianity now cannot be studied and understood without studying the context of world religions, of the different religions, and how Christianity engages with that context. And also, more importantly, and also now the Christian public engagement. So in these areas, how world Christianity can be defined as connecting Christianities. And the center is moving ahead with such a vision to bring together Christians from diverse backgrounds in dialogue and conversation and engagement, and learning from each other and learning together. And as many of you know, the Summer Institute, the World Christianity Summer Institute that we are going to inaugurate this year in July, is one initiative we are taking as part of this vision to bring together Christians of different backgrounds, different age groups, and different denominations, bringing them together here in Cambridge for a week, for a summer institute for a week, in which we will be studying together and learning together how, as world Christians, we can respond to some of the challenges around us. And we begin with responding to the challenge of the pandemic, which is still with us. But with the topic of the challenge of the pandemic with resilience, I mean, how we approach it with resilience and hope. And with that concept, we are bringing people together, and this part of our vision. And we continue to be thankful for your kind support and participation in our events. Thank you.